issues are with the religious fraudsters.
Yeah.
So this week I've discovered, quite stunningly, and that's why they're hitting on me so hard now, that the links between the false Christianity and the writers of the Bible were a family called the Pisos. I think I tried to mention that to you the last time we talked. But the stunning thing that I discovered this week is that the Piso family are related to a genealogical bloodline called the oh goodness me, it's so new to me that I keep forgetting the dynasty. Let's see if I can find their graph. It's the Piso. I keep wanting to say Frigo, but basically the new family that I've discovered, and I've got it all over my Facebook. You're not on Facebook, are you?
Huh?
You're not
I'm not on Facebook. Yeah, I'm on Facebook. Sure, I'm on Facebook.
Oh, you are? I didn't realise that.
Oh yeah, sure. And I've got people who've set up Facebook sites in my name that I didn't even know were there.
Ah,
I appreciate that.
So the Piso name I've been aware of for 2 years now, and all of the massive jokes about that in popular culture. I think I tried to explain to you before, all the Oscars in Hollywood, The Life of Pi, everywhere where the P and I word comes in, and it's, how good are your linguistics?
Oh, I'm a theoretician of language, but I'm not much of a linguist.
So when you look up Piso on Google Translate, it's amazing. You find that it means the Nile, it means it means all sorts of things. I'm so shocked by it, but the Frugi bit that I discovered only this week is that they are married into the family that wrote the New Testament in the Villa Papyri in Naples, and their role in life as the Frugis is to be the heads of the mint. So what I've got now is the root cause of all of the banking frauds in world history and the massive Christianity fraud at the same time. And within minutes, because my home's heavily surveilled, and within minutes of me preparing all of that information to present it in a video, the law enforcement Scotland team arrived on my doorstep, and they've now shut down my electricity supply, but they've given me a £15 allowance, which is why I was so urgently trying to talk to you, and it's just stunning. And a couple of weeks ago I discovered that you know how we've got, America doesn't have dukes and duchesses, does it at all?
No.
Okay, so I discovered that have you heard of Thomas More?
Yeah.
So Thomas More was executed in the religious strife that was introduced by King Henry VIII's love life. Yeah, Henry VIII needed to continue his bloodline by changing his wives, and all of the children that he produced either died young or were of the female gender, and that means that each of the wives has to be replaced. And in that movie there's a character called he's the Duke of Norfolk, and he's one of the people that becomes the contenders to be the Chancellor in England once Thomas More's locked away, and Cromwell is the man behind the plotting and getting rid of the Cardinal. Yeah, and all of it makes it look as if Thomas More is the victim and he's been betrayed by his friend. Now that friend, the Duke of Norfolk, that bloodline is still intact, and it's amazing who the characters are in that bloodline, and I've published videos on that in the last 2 or 3 weeks, but because I've not been talking to people of your magnitude and fame, none of the news has really gotten out yet. So if you look up the Duke of Norfolk's family tree, it's quite stunning, because it takes you back to Longshanks. You know Longshanks that is in the Braveheart movie, and there's the famous, you know, warrior who took England into the Crusades in the Holy Lands. I think that was it the 5th or 6th Crusade in the Holy Lands? Yeah, and when you look through the bloodline, it takes you to Commoner Kate. Yeah, the Middletons are in the bloodline for, I can't remember, it's something like 200 years, and you've got all sorts of families that are legends. Let me see if I can find the family tree. And I'm making enough noise now to attract attention. The first time this evening I've been able to talk to Field McConnell live. And are you pair friends or are you rivals?
Well, I'm trying to recall what Field's views were about 9/11. I know he had some exchanges one way or another way back when, but can you remind me of his views, George?
Well, he's widely followed. He's got 600,000 followers, and I'm quite frustrated that he, unlike you, he does not let strangers into the discussion. So it's almost always in a little chat room that they have in, is it Plum County? I think it's Minnesota that they live in, and I was quite stunned when I said
he's in Minneapolis.
I think so. Is Plum City in that county?
I don't know about Plum City. I thought he was in the UK.
No, he's a legend, and the movement is called Able Danger, and it's because it's got that anti-treason label. I'm very drawn to them, but sadly, unlike you and Red Ice Radio and the other English-speaking analysts, they encode everyone. So he's Agent Chips. Everybody knows he's Field McConnell, but everything I submit to them gets encoded, and they don't use the real names, and I don't know what the motive for that is, because that's how the tyrants do their business. But he's got a vast audience, and almost everybody I've met or been introduced to on Skype are followers of him. And Greg and you are the only exception to that. And is Greg still breathing?
Yes. I'm relieved to say he is.
And is it the same person? Have you seen him in the flesh?
Yeah, the same person. Yeah, sure. We do a video Skype. He's fine.
So why has he dropped his monarchy crusade?
I don't know if he has.
Alright, I just got the impression that things were now on a religious slant, and the monarchy stance that he took, which was so well informed for me, that explains huge numbers of the world's current problems. And I've now begun to correspond with Buckingham Palace and the monarchy, because the world is in such a chaotic state that I told you in that video we made that we had to truncate, that I was aware of the war crimes jokes and all of the massive frauds that occur in peacetime and in wartime in the profiteering sector, and I've got all the director numbers for that. And Greg seemed like such a serious person, and he had the monarchy held to account. And I've discovered some new sensations on those themes. You know how he told you about blind Prince George of Cumbria siring Queen Victoria's first child? Can you remember? Yeah, so I've now discovered that blind Prince George of Cumbria was the Prince of Cumbria and Teviotdale, and that's only 40 miles from my home. Yeah, and it's just amazing, and that takes you into the demonization of the German monarchs. That was Prince Albert, and the Windsors had to change their name from Windsor, right in the middle of World War One. And if you remember what we talked about the last time, we were talking about Woodrow Wilson and the coercion of Woodrow Wilson and his affair at Princeton, that meant that he was forced into engaging in World War One despite his pre-electoral pledge. And you're aware of all the background to that, with the people that were appointed to the Jewish Supreme Court?
No, I'm not sure I am at all, George, so I think you're much more on top of that than I.
Oh, so their name was Untermeyer and Brandeis. Have you heard of them in American history?
Sure, of course.
So they are the people.
Brandeis is very famous. Justice, Associate Justice of the Supreme Court.
So I think they were the first two Jews, and when Bill Clinton came into the scene, he put another 3 Jews on the Supreme Court.
Wow.
And so that's Andrew Carrington Hitchcock.
Today we have 6 Catholics and 3 Jews. How odd is that?
Well, it's just amazing how many of these secrets are just narrowly below the surface. But the thing that stuns me is how much time and money is spent on covering up the brutal crimes of our great-grandparents. And you know how in Britain now you're not allowed to smack your children, but we still are releasing all of that false news and all of the New World Order music to cover up the crimes of our, the last couple of generations. And it is really trivial and quite sickening that we have to resort to that all the time. And now that I'm completely backed into the corner on my own, but I'm delighted that I'm talking to you again, and I'm quite stunned that you haven't heard of Field's following. They claim to have 600,000 people following them. And
but I'm trying to remember. There was some issue involving the planes, I think, where we had a difference. I'm convinced none of those crash sites was real. All 4 crash sites were fake. 2 of the planes were still flying around after the event. The other 2 weren't even in the air. So it was all fakery. And there was something about Field's position that led us into some sort of conflict, as I recall, maybe even over the Pentagon.
Yeah, I remember there was a big fallout about whether it was drones or whether it was planes, and everybody was showing the images close up and distant. But I prefer to stick to the financial frauds and the big leadership scams, rather than the technology of the fatal accident. But now, there's so much treason in our countries that it is just chaotic, and all the news that is released is the cover-up for the truth that none of the politicians work to make the country stable or prosperous. They're just planted there to keep it in chaos. And you and Greg analysed that deeply. Yeah, and on the videos that you made, numbers 5 and 6, on the Royals, your interpretations of what is happening in Britain were spot on, and that's why I'm so stunned that if it is the same Greg Hallett, that all of that dialogue has been dropped. The last videos he made were on taking the cause into London, trying to get things delivered to the Queen. And all of those things I've tried to tie together in my message to the Queen on the 1st of July, and I've sent it registered post. I have not received a receipt, because it discusses openly the issues of the German monarchs and the siring of Queen Victoria's babies, but there's all sorts of geopolitical and economic frauds tied in that puts the world in a perpetually dangerous place. America is economically, are you still struggling, and or is it a benign?
Yeah, we're on the verge of financial collapse. It looks.
Because you see what Gordon Bowden and I have done, I've analysed those frauds and the money laundering frauds. So what happened in your reset in 2008 now happens every day of the week on a minute to second time scale, and the laundering shells are so massive and so numerous that it becomes a global nightmare. And that coupled with the quantitative easing packages means that, you know, inflation is rampant again, and the ordinary people are being scammed in massive energy company scams. That's why they've shut me down. The energy bills here in this country are rising at it's something like 20% a year. Yeah, and inflation is proclaimed to be 1%, and all of those energy companies are just selling the products that we had already in my hometown the year that Kennedy was shot. Yeah, and it's just a process of carving up and subsidiarizing into Ponzi shells everything that was public energy in the 1960s. They now have 6 big energy companies selling exactly the same product, and each of the 6 has hundreds of Ponzi shells all across Europe. And the Gazprom scam out of Eastern Europe through Gerhard Schroeder's Germany is just as big and just as vicious, and they have 30 odd registered companies to the west of Amsterdam. Yeah, and all of that, it's massive fraudulent stealing from the people, and it's covered up by the trivial news, and the news is so trivial, it's pathetic now. And I don't know, is it like that in America? When you discover something and you release it, immediately the papers cover it up? Have you experienced that? So we've had massive scandals about FIFA, which is the world organisation that organises our football programmes, and it's a joke about the Roman federations, because when the Church of Rome and the Roman Empire got too far from home, there were a series of provincial, states that had been taken over by Rome in the launch of the empire, but they were so far away that they could not feed themselves and that launches the federations, which are like the protection rackets that were run when the mafias got into America. And that is all of the false news on the FIFA stories on the front pages of our papers in Britain, because I've revealed the truth about how the Church of Rome went east, west and upwards. Yeah, and the Eastern movement is really sinister, because the Piso family also wrote the Quran and that was released in 610 AD, and the publishers were in Tel Aviv. Yeah, it's just astounding. And can you see how all of that, so the Church of Rome moving to Constantinople, because that's a joke about Emperor Constantine being the first one to endorse the nascent Christian religion, and from that point, I think he was around 350 AD, from that point they began to crucify the Jews en masse, and it's really, really sinister. And when the biggest church in the Christian world is, and this is the George Clooney joke, the biggest church in the Christian world before the Vatican was erected or built was the Cluny Abbey in southern France. It's in the Clermont-Ferrand region, and it is the Clooney joke. And the woman Klein, who's the freedom fighter and revealed all the news about the shock doctrine for Naomi Klein. Clooney is actually pronounced Klein, and that's the Kevin Klein joke. And all of their jokes, like the Fish Called Wanda film, is entirely about false Christianity, and all of the names in it are covers for the Piso family members. And John Cleese, the man who made all of those Monty Python's jokes, it's just a laugh. All of his output was about the Basel Central Bank, and that's the Basel Faulty jokes on the BBC comedies. And all of it is a whole series of interlocking jokes. And do you know what happened to that name Klein and Clooney when they got into Scotland and just before they went into Ireland? Can you guess what it became? Because the Piso family wrote it, so it becomes, because of that pie word and the emphasis on the life of Pi and all the Piso stories, and the Pishon is the name of the Nile, and all of it to take the piss, and the peso is the Latin American currency. It's just a joke about the first two letters in their name. So when Christianity comes to Scotland, it becomes the Paisley Abbey, and that is the sectarian violence joke that means that for 30 years Ireland's Protestants and Catholics are tearing each other apart and blowing each other up. And that's the Airy Neve story and the Lord Mountbatten story that Greg told you. Yeah, do you get it? So Ian Paisley is an icon for Protestantism, and that's the Paisley Abbey in Glasgow, just a moniker for the Piso family who launched the biblical fraud all over the world. And it's the biggest cause of death in human history. And the Rothschilds are really, really clever, because they opted for Judaism in Eastern Europe, in the Ukrainian region that we talked about in our first interview. You remember that? You had to curtail the amount of airtime that we had because President Obama was making a speech that afternoon on the crisis in Ukraine. So Ukraine is the Rothschild homeland, and they opted for Judaism so that they could use the anti-Semitic tool to cover up all of the massive war crimes. Are you still awake?
Yeah. Yeah.
So do you see the magnitude of that? That's Irish sectarian violence. And Greg explained to you, or was it Red Ice Radio, that the man that tried to have him killed, Peter Williams QC, was the chief fundraiser for the IRA, and the IRA get trained in fascist Spain, and fascist Spain now has the monarchs. You remember that the Philips light tubes were used to take the narcotics wealth out of Europe and into the South Pacific. I think Greg told you that story. And the Philips light tubes are another one of the corporations that are run by the Dutch royals, like Royal Dutch Shell, the oil company. And it's just a huge set of crimes against the global competency of each sovereign state. No state now has that sovereignty, and I was quite stunned when I talked to Field McConnell, because they're much less academic than you. You like me cite your sources and things. They tend to be a lot more sensational in their releases, and they hit on more historic figures than you and me. Yeah, I've got all Kissinger's director number. You remember how Greg told you that Henry Kissinger was the biggest killer?
Yeah.
I've got all his director numbers with the Royal Princes and the Rothschilds and the Murdochs and the B-Sky B contracts. It's massive. Yeah, and the English-speaking people are the owners of the world, and that's why I'm being persecuted in my own home, because my wife is from the Hertfordshire region and her brother is in the Chipping Norton region where the Prime Minister in England lives. Yeah, so it's overtly political, and I'm making, a series of images tonight to show how my wife's divorce team is entirely intent on silencing me as, like you, one of the most informed people on the globe. But I believe that, you know, I'm already making a huge difference. They've already started to reverse their policies. David Cameron has taken our country out of every conflict zone that Tony Blair took it into. Almost. Yeah, and that is a huge policy reversal for Britain. I don't know whether is Obama doing the same thing across there? I don't get the Sky News anymore. What's your foreign policy been like in recent months?
Well,
oh, it's still combative.
Oh yeah, sending more training forces to Ukraine, trying to provoke Russia. It's very stupid, George.
Yeah.
Very stupid, short-sighted. We have too many neocons in the wrong positions.
Because you see, Putin is a full member of their team, but since Greg and I exposed him as an intel presence who was, you know, like Stalin, gifted the country because of what he did to New Zealand, yeah, as an intel presence there with Hill and Clark. You remember you discussing that with Greg? Or
I'm not sure, not off the top of my head.
So Hill and Clark was the Labour Party leader for 3 regimes back to back, and for the 6 years that we were there, I thought she was an admirable person, because she would not deploy New Zealand people in NATO's armies, but as soon as she takes over as the head of the UN, you know, Greg revealed quite a lot about her sexual deviancy and how that means that everybody in the Beehive, which is the Parliament building in New Zealand, is corrupted. Yeah, and Greg used to talk to me on Skype about how there were only 1 or 2 decent parliamentarians in the whole of that government building. And that government building is quite unique because they have war dead on the wall of the Beehive. You know, New Zealand and Australia are abused perpetually by the Crown Templar, and that is what I was telling you about the war crimes jokes when we had to curtail that last interview we made. It was on, incredibly, we made the interview on Remembrance Sunday in Britain. Yeah, and when I got to the stories about Mr. Bean at the London Olympics was the war correspondent for Gallipoli. You know, can you remember that?
That's fascinating stuff.
Well, it's just absolutely shocking, because the Chariots of Fire music that was played is a joke about playing sport for your country on a Sunday, and all of the elites that can read and write in Latin and Greek are aware that Christianity is just a fake-up for 2,000 years, and the Old Testament is a fake-up too. You know, the things like Jonah with the Father God in the belly of the mammalian whale, it's a joke about Jesus displacing the gods in the skies, and it's in your national anthem. Yeah, the land of the braves and the killing of all the pagans and the sun coming up in the morning. It's a joke about the Father God and the Son God. It's when you begin to see how everything that they kill, they laugh at it, and all the comedians across the globe, they laugh at it relentlessly, and that has been used to cover it up. But now when you analyse it and you show what actually happened there, the main cause of death in Gallipoli was dysentery, and it's really tragic. And our comedies on the BBC laugh at all of those things. Like we talked about Untermeyer, and they talk as they come in the last of the Blackadder episodes that they made on the World War One. You know, their biggest ever triumph. I think it was 80 million people in World War One, and they made the last of the comedies in the Blackadder team about coming over the lip of the trenches. Yeah, and they pretended that the boss at Oxford was going to end the war that year, and it was 1917. Yeah, when America entered the war, and it is really, really vicious, and they are proclaimed now. Their sponsors in the Time team in the false history at the BBC are the leading Zionist organisation in the world. Do you know who that is?
Tell me.
Walt Disney. Yeah, it's just shocking. And their other sponsor in the time team at the, I can't remember whether it's Cambridge or Oxford, but they have, it's in Christ's College. Yeah, and can you see everything about the Christian fraud is tied into the war crimes frauds? And now that I've learned about the Frugis, yeah, that is the banking frauds and the banking dynasties, and the names are still the same today. So if you look up the Frugi Piso family tree, I can send you some links when we're finished, but you look up the Piso-Frugi family tree, you'll see that there's a Camerinus on it. Yeah, and all the surviving world leaders are in it, and even Shimon Peres's relatives are in it. You'll have to look at the videos I've made on it to understand that, but can you see why they're dead keen to gag me? And that's why I'm trying to reach out to America to get you guys to share some of the news if we possibly can in the next few days. So could I make a, do you still do the Real Deal?
Yeah, but it's gone video now. It's video.
What does that mean?
Well, it's like a television show, not just radio.
Oh, so I have to get myself a webcam.
Well, send me a proposal, George, what you have in mind.
Which of those themes that I've just touched on was the most interesting to you? You were quite astounded by the magnitude of the electoral fraud, and what Gordon and I have found out about, you know, what the intel do in peacetime now is the laundering chores, and it's really, really vicious. Like, none of the money that democracy should have comes to democracy anymore. School teachers, everybody's had their pay frozen for 7 years back to back, and you know, I'm led to believe from my contacts in my town that there are 13 federal banks in America. Is that correct?
Yeah, there are what?
13 federal banks. One of them is in Minnesota, but there are 12 others.
How many Federal Reserve Banks? That's
yeah.
Probably right.
And I was quite stunned by that. I thought that in every one of the democratic countries that has its own sovereignty, that there was one bank making the decisions and issuing democracy's funding, but that doesn't happen anymore. It's all a series of elite-led scams, and that's why I wrote to the Queen, because, you know, nothing that democracy should have. We could be with a civilized world within a year if they were to give the funding back to the countries, and if any of the politicians were worth their salt, but that is not the case. You must be aware of the massive coercion that gets them picked for power. Yeah, and you and Greg talked about that a lot, and you know, it's just amazing that the world can be this evil when everybody, all the citizens of the world, are really upstanding and innocent. They just keep paying their taxes, and they keep paying for the charitable initiatives, and the energy bill hikes that are imposed on them by our quisling leaders are absolutely ruthless, and it will tear the world into another global war. And do you realise the magnitude of what I've told you? Because, you know, even in the lead up to the national election here that we had just a few months ago, it was demonisation perpetually of Islam. Yeah, and there are, when you look on the Scottish in the British business records for Islam, you get 2,000 hits under directors. Yeah, and it's most of them are run by the Israeli banks. The other sponsor for the time team at Christ's College, Cambridge, is McDonald's. And you know that Detweiler McDonald is now the leading supplier of the world's drones. Did you know that?
Yeah.
And that's Detweiler in the Sound of Music film. The Von Trapp.
George, why don't you send me an email with a couple of proposals and let me ponder them, okay? Give me a little more time to think about this.
If you don't get it, it's because my power has closed down. They've only given me an allowance of £15. Yeah, that's how sad the bastards are.
You mean you can't even send an email?
Oh no, it's still up, and they've put a meter on my gas supply and my electricity supply, but they've told me that there's £15 allocated to electricity and £10 allocated to gas, and that I will receive in the post in the next couple of days. We're now 4 days beyond that pledge. I have no way to feed the meter, and it means that I have no electricity to charge my batteries, to make my videos, or to light up the computers. It's a scandal. Yeah, and I didn't realise you were on Facebook. I will share. You're really good at sharing the news with the world. So what is your Facebook page called? Is it
James Fetzer?
Oh, James. I always call you Jim.
James. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
so I'll send you something that we might talk about.
Okay, good, George. Do that. We'll do it.
And this time we might even get 2 hours in. Yeah, if President Obama doesn't come up with another crisis for you.
Yeah, well.
Cheers.
Let's make contact on Facebook, my friend.
Cheers, Jim. Thanks for your intelligence and understanding. Bye.
My pleasure, George. Bye now.